I want to talk about Franco Colapinto. And no, it's not out of pity or because he's an easy target, because I think he's already done enough to warrant a place next year in Formula One. Yes, he's last in the championship. He replaced Jack Doohan, who wasn't exactly lighting the world on fire either, and yet, if you actually look closely, Colapinto is showing the kind of fight and resilience that really makes me think Alpine should probably keep him. Besides, Pierre can barely get anything out of the A525 at the moment. Him fighting for his life at the back at the same time as his teammate. Him actually saying, around Baku especially, that it wasn't really much fun, that the only thing I could do was have a go around my teammate. And then Verstappen jokingly making light of that, saying, "Oh, I lost so much time behind them." Yeah, Alpine were the butt of a joke between Verstappen and GP. That's how bad things have gotten for both drivers there. Cut them both some slack. And especially since Pierre has guaranteed his services with them through 2028, him especially being galled. And when you get Pierre sometimes being out-qualified by Colapinto, it's nowhere near as clear-cut in the head-to-heads as you might think. That, in of itself, might be a messy situation. And for Alpine themselves, this season has been an absolute mess. Although, having said that, things are looking a lot calmer than they were just about 3 or 4 months ago. You know, after the whole Oliver Oaks just disappearing into the ether and making us think, did he actually ever exist? After all of those financial irregularities. Look, the money was just resting in the account! The team is still not entirely settled, at least not yet. Renault and Alpine are staring at the wreckage of this Team Enstone outfit and are going, well, now what? And right now, what they've got is Pierre Gasly and Franco Colapinto. That's the hand they are forced to play. So even though Alpine has just accepted their lot and are just suffering through the rest of the season, just trying to make the most out of what they possibly have, maybe a cheeky opportunity for a point or two if there's absolute bedlam at the front, I'm really thinking they're just grinning and bearing it, and therefore it's really not a good enough barometer for what happens in 2026. In the middle of 2026, Briatore, whatever. But give Franco a fair chance at least in pre-season testing. But to be fair, Briatore has said a lot of things this season, which just makes us think, did he actually even say that, or were we just imagining it? A lot of gaslighting has been had thanks to this guy. I don't think he realizes that the internet exists so he can actually fact-check him. This is not the early 90s. It's been prevalent throughout the entire year. One week he's saying Franco has a 5-race trial after replacing Doohan. The following week, trial? What trial? Then he pivots to Paul Aaron. Then rants that F2 has no standout talents there, conveniently forgetting that some of his Alpine Academy drivers are based within that series. Kushmaini, Gabriele Mini, hello? But this is peak Flavio. Chaos with an Italian accent, and that whole F2 chestnut he said recently was the crux as why Colapinto and Aaron are the only two figures, at least in terms of rookie potential. Briatore lambasting that one round a potential favourite wins outright, the next they're out of the points, struggling to get P13. Well, I hate to break it to you, Flavvy boy, but neither Paul or Franco were really describing what you wanted within F2. They had their peaks and troughs within that series themselves. That's what spec series are all about. But speaking of Flavio, despite his reputation, Franco hasn't been perturbed by his presence. And what I'm about to share with you, the comments that Franco recently made on the Beyond the Grid podcast, is a real tell after what he experienced over at Williams. They are night and day. Chalk and cheese. James Vowles is the equivalent of the Gordon Ramsay meme of, oh dear, oh gorgeous. And then Briatore's over in the corner saying, you amazing doggy. Here are Franco's words for your consideration, and this is why I really think he's got a good chance here. He's playing the game very well, like Pierre has been. Ahem. I have a very good relationship with Briatore. He is hard with everyone. His way of making the team work and making the people motivated is sometimes a bit hard. I'd say it's a bit of an understatement. And sometimes it can feel a little bit too much if you don't know him. But he is someone I really believe in, and someone that I believe is going to move this team forward and is going to put Alpine back at the top. I learned a lot from him this year. He made me a lot stronger. He made me strong mentally, and I do believe that years like this, when it starts to become better, and when we start to win, to have good results, to be fighting at the top, it's what makes a difference. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity he gave me, but also for all this process that we are going through. Now, after reading that, there is one thing that Colapinto does not lack here, and that is absolute fortitude. He has got staying power. Despite him admittedly confessing that he did have an element of shock and awe when he came over from Williams to Alpine and then realised the full force of Flavio actually behind closed doors. I cannot wait for that element within Drive to Survive. Surely that has to be a story beat, because Franco in Drive to Survive last year, he wasn't in there, and he was one of the stories of the season! Netflix! What the hell? Yeah, okay, sorry about that. I got a little bit heated there. Still, though, it was a really good story, a compelling one, and we didn't see it. But that quote really told me he can learn on the fly, and he has resilience, which matters a lot when in a slow car. I still can't get over that Renault's bowing out of F1 in that thing. Yes, I know Alpine's a Renault brand, but you know what I'm getting at here. But what Franco demonstrated right there was political awareness, which is really saying something considering the place where he came from. Williams, under the Vowels umbrella, a place which has become essentially, no, entirely apolitical. You only have to look to their drivers, Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz. Those two guys are the living embodiment of non-political drivers, not wanting that element of Formula One and motorsport to get in the way of doing the business with we-ums. So you just really have to think that Franco's gone through the school of hard knocks and come out the other side a better driver, that he managed to survive the slings and arrows and therefore he can easily improve ever further. If he can survive now, just imagine what he could maybe survive in the years to come, if he is afforded that chance, because remember, he is on a 5-year deal with Alpine and we are only into the first year. And there is an element of political fortitude that Briatore has to have, because dropping Franco or demoting him in the very first year of this deal, a 5-year one, which you yourself signed, yet you can't hide away from that, matey boy. Sorry, flabby boy. But yeah, rule number 1, don't rub your boss up the wrong way. Yeah, Franco's passed that test. Now, I've alluded to this next point in previous winners and losers videos, when there have been moments when Franco has either managed to slightly win out against Gasly or been downright solid. But I think this is something that passes people by because it wasn't going for a world championship point, and again, him being mathematically down at the bottom of the championship, aside from Jack Doohan, it does make him an easy target, because the next person above him has about 16 points to their name, whereas Franco has nada. And as we've seen very clearly within Formula One, if you are down at the bottom of the championship, you are subject to ridicule, because haha, last. That is the case for anybody, irrespective of their nationality. Just look at all the ridicule that Valtteri Bottas was getting last year. Now, just a few months later, oh, everybody loves him again. Performance-wise, Franco has been closer to Gasly than people have been thinking. The race's qualifying duel numbers put the gap at about 0.2 on average to Gasly, with the Frenchman leading 8-4 in qualifying. But that's much tighter than Gasly versus Doohan earlier in the year, and that's what a viable rookie in a bad car looks like. Not a lost cause, but someone who's adapting, improving, and in some cases, getting ever closer to their teammate, a more experienced one, and maybe getting the jump on him. And as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the bare bones of what a rookie should be in Formula One, I think he's in step with everybody else. Yes, you might be thinking, well, you just said it, that all the rookies have at least scored 16 points throughout the season. In the case of Isaac Hadjar, he's scored 39. Kimi Antonelli, he's not that far from getting into triple figures, or even at least just besting what Oscar Piastri was able to get in his own debut season. Yes, but it's all a matter of perspective, really. All the rookies have had their own shaky weekends. Even Isaac Hadjar has had moments and weekends where he has really dropped the ball, and he holds his hand up about it. Kimi Antonelli, who everyone thought was going to be the Rookie of the Year by storm, had a dreadful European campaign. Bortoletto, I would say probably is arguably the most consistent rookie out of all of them, even though there have been moments where he hasn't been scoring points, but come off it, he's been in a salvo where he's been near the back for most of the season. What I'm seeing from Colapinto, it's not a sign where I'm thinking, oh my god, he is absolutely dreadful. Even with the slowest car at times, he is in the mix with everybody else. No, I'm not a fair weather fan here, I'm not taking pity on the guy. I've rated Franco the very moment he stepped in that car and showed what he could do. I've stuck by this kid, and I am going to continue to do so. And if he does get to survive the beginnings of 2026, he does have an advantage over Gasly, and that is experience with Mercedes hardware. Yes, of course, The power unit he tried out over at Williams to the one that Alpine will be getting from their suppliers Mercedes will be different because, well, new regulations and what have you. But the fundamentals of Mercedes' characteristics, there'll be an element of experience and knowledge that Franco has, which Pierre is going to be having to spend a fair bit of time getting to grips with himself, having no experience of Mercedes power units whatsoever in his Formula One career. That advantage could be really critical, especially since Flavio missed out on maybe getting Valtteri Bottas. The rumours about maybe Kimi Antonelli coming over on a loan deal were quashed by Toto himself. Briatore has had to deal with a lot of rejection, most likely, from anybody with Mercedes power unit experience, including Carlos Sainz. Remember all of that last year? So Franco, I think he could be, well, the example of any port in a storm, but a port that you actually kind of like. And serves good mate. Yes, it might be no big deal to some more casual Formula One fans, but I'm assuring you, that will matter in terms of data gathering. That being said, and to be fair, the crashes he's had are real and undeniable. I'm not here to pretend they don't exist, and Franco, he has also been guilty of making mistakes throughout his career. And with modern internet culture really coming to the fore, especially in Formula 2, those major incidents really catch a lot of attention and generate a broader reach because car crash, driver bad. That's how it works, no matter who you are. I mean, there was the Imola shunt on his Alpine debut. There was the Silverstone qualifying incident. And most recently, the crash during the Pirelli tyre test where he went into the barriers, hoping that no one would notice. Alpine hoping that no one would notice because this wasn't a Grand Prix weekend. And then, you know, it did anyway. And then, of course, Franco getting in the way of my boy at Austria. I mean, yeah, that was something where I was like, hey, Franco, I get it, you were trying your best, but yeah. But then amongst all of that, there have been some real gems, and Zandvoort was one of them. And arguably, I think the Canadian Grand Prix weekend was another diamond in the rough weekend as well. And enough to make me think that, yeah, Franco replacing Jack Doohan was worthwhile, although I still also think that Jack Doohan should have probably been given more time. It should have been a 12-12 split. And after the Dutch race, Briatore publicly called it his strongest race of the year, one where he might have scored his first championship point for Alpine had it not been down to various strategic errors from Alpine's part, and Gasly perhaps being a little bit too frantic in his defending of the teammate, as well as all of the swapping of positions. And when I look back at that, this is something that I think he was prone to doing with Ocon, vigorously and aggressively over-defending against his own teammate. It really does make you wonder. Pierre does not like being shown up by the guy in the same car as him. And I know, you know, the whole thing about the first battle or race you have is with your teammate, but Pierre really does like to hustle, doesn't he? But anyway, you're probably wondering why I really rate Franco for 2026. Well, there are plenty of reasons to be had here. I mean, just for starters, Alpine is in a really bad position at the moment, where it's really not in a position to garner top-name talent, much like how Williams were circa 2022, when Nicky Latifi ultimately was given the marching orders. No disrespect to Nicky, by the way. He was a very nice guy, and he did serve Williams very well, helped get them out of the financial black hole, but you know, by 2022 his time was up. He wasn't working with those new cars. So I'll start it all off with that quote from Beyond the Grid, is that he is on the same page as his team. He is not trying to carve out his own niche or go it alone or thinking that he is better than the team he's representing. He knows where he is and he's staying in his lane. Politically, that is crucial. And it seems like the Argentine appreciates Briatore's direct comments. Some drivers in F1 or otherwise may reject that kind of stuff and spiral into either a loss of form or having to find employment elsewhere. It might have been the undoing of Jack Doohan in the midst of Flavio Briatore. And Colapinto claims to be able to roll with that. That is quite scarce these days with youngsters. And when a rookie invites that kind of hard feedback and stays mostly positive in public, and maybe even happy to present said positivity on social media, the whole garage benefits. There's no need to tippy-toe around Franco or, you know, make sure not to hurt his feelings or mollycoddle him, protect him from the world or the nasty, scary comments. No, he's ready. He can take it. He's ready to push his body to the limit. And in some cases, in some interviews, he does just that. I think in one recently he fainted off camera, and that just goes to show he was pushing his body to the limit and he wasn't afraid to give up. Yeah, you might be thinking, well, what about the comments you made at Qatar 2023 when Logan had to pull into the pits? I equally respect what Logan did. He knew his limits and he decided not to endanger anyone else on the grid. He made a call and that was mature of him. It just works depending on the context and where you're situated. And, at least in English-speaking territories, Franco is not pointing fingers or doing anything related to the blame game, although some Spanish-speaking commenters have told me he is a little bit more spicy with non-English-speaking broadcasters, as is the case with maybe some other drivers in their own respective territories. I think Fernando is quite spicy in Spanish-speaking channels or something. I think you don't need me to tell you that maybe they're a little bit more candid in the countries where they don't have to speak English. Then there's also the commercial tailwinds. They are real and they will help him out immensely. And don't you worry. I am not saying, oh, that's just because Franco's a paid driver, that's why he's going to be there next year. No, when you look at the wider spectrum and that Beyond the Grid interview, all this good fortune, the literal fortune, is a relatively recent phenomena. For most of Colapinto's career in the junior categories, it was a grind which was alleviated somewhat when he joined the Williams Academy and then when he replaced Logan Sargent. All of a sudden, Argentinian companies were everywhere. You saw Globant on banners around F1 Grand Prix, and then they were drowning him and their respective teams with money. And naturally, Alpine was willing to leverage it. They were after more and more cash. And no, Williams aren't all high and mighty about this. They were certainly milking this for all it was worth for that 9-race stint that Franco did with them. They had many sponsorship announcements, and they had many stickers, including the yellow of Mercado Libre on their airboxes. In fact, it's far more pronounced what Williams had than what Alpine's done on their respective liveries. And yes, sponsorship itself will not make Franco go faster, but it will provide him that little bit of extra assurance that maybe the management of Alpine aren't going to make a panicked decision anytime soon. Remember, Flavio dropped a lot of money on Franco, about $15 million for a 5-year deal from Williams, which James Vowles gladly took. So it's very much in the best interest of Briatore to give Franco as much time as possible. Yes, Franco does come with money, as does pretty much any other driver up and down the grid. And even if they don't come with their own personal sponsors, their own visage is enough to generate more money for the respective teams, as McLaren has demonstrated. Lando is the McLaren walking billboard. So I really don't think Colapinto should be vilified for that sort of thing. The paid drivers of old, they've died a death. We don't see paid drivers in Formula 1 anymore, or at least not at the moment. And let's not forget the national fervour, which Liberty Media very much is looking at and going, he's the first Argentine driver in over 2 decades. That brings a wide fan base with him and a country which is really looking for a hero right now. Alpine has a whole country behind one man. Their man. For Liberty Media, that's gold. And them hosting the F1 exhibition around Buenos Aires recently tells you all you need to know. F1, Formula 1 management, oh, they like Colapinto's story right now. And okay, I will mention this. Some of Franco's fan base has been very aggressive, borderline toxic in regards to moments when Franco and another driver get into a tangle, and the comments that I have seen regarding that, especially with Tsunoda, were downright disgusting and do not deserve to be platformed. But I must point out, Franco does not support that way of thinking, and he very much said for those individuals to wind their neck in and give him proper support, because that was not doing him any favours for some of the people that were on the fence regarding Franco or had no interest in Franco. It just made the whole Franco thing look problematic where it wasn't. As a result, it has calmed down a bit, but it did flare up again with the Albon Colapinto situation around Baku. I mean, the comments did get pretty heated, but not nearly as bad as they were at the beginning of the year. They've learnt, but it's still not gone. But then when you stop and compare it to what the Lando fans are saying and the Oscar fans are saying, and current events being dragged into it, in terms of satire, ugh. Third, his public reads on the car do match what I think the team has been saying over race weekends. He's talked about difficulties on corner entry and confidence in the front end, which is consistent with the traits that have bitten Alpine drivers across 2025. Including the whole lack of power down a straight. And that kind of coherence matters whilst Alpine is in a rebuilding phase. It just means that what Franco is reporting in the debriefs is somewhat representative and might go some way to help in terms of progression for the 2026 car if he does remain with them for the A526. It means he's not scrambling around for some kind of cockamamie excuse as to why he crashed the car, for example around the Hungarian Grand Prix Pirelli tyre test. And yes, I know, Franco crashing the car is one of the golden rules that Flavio imparted upon the Argentinian, as in to not crash. At least when he does crash, he is able to provide good feedback as to why he crashed. That is better than nothing. Fourth, the gap to Gasly isn't based around vibes or anything like that, or a trust me bro sort of thing. We're not dealing with a scenario where Gasly is vastly ahead of Colapinto and he is thrashing him. Because throughout an entire race weekend, I'm looking at the timesheets and seeing Colapinto very close to Gasly, or in some cases, ahead of him. Even when he did crash into the barriers around Baku, he ultimately did outqualify Pierre and remained within the Frenchman's line of sight. They were duking it out, and Pierre has way more experience than Franco, and has been embedded within that team for a good couple of seasons now, and has managed to completely revolve the team around him, managing to push out Esteban Ocon over to Haas, who arguably this year has had the last laugh. But even then, the fact that Gasly has points and Franco has none and Jack has none, it just makes any rookie who isn't able to score against the Frenchman look worse just by pure comparison with numbers and stats when you're not looking at the race itself. Yet when you look at the actual head-to-heads, because that's the only thing you can really look at representatively with Alpine at the moment, it is really interesting stuff and makes me think, you know what, patience is warranted here going into 2026, at least for pre-season testing and at least for the flyaway races of next season as the car beds itself in before we get into Europe. Only then could Alpine maybe make a reasonable call, which is somewhat representative between, Franco and Paul. And then all the stuff I talked about at the beginning of the video, Franco has shown that he can adapt and he can quickly learn what he needs to do and what he needs to say. That is very important with Flavio Briatore running the show, even though Steve Nielsen is technically the team principal. Let's be real here, he is mainly a puppet. It's like how Mike Crack was not the real boss, it was Papa Stroll. It is Flavio that's calling the shots here. Renault Group have reasserted their commitment to the sport, and they are showing no signs in sacking the Italian. It means he still has carte blanche to do what he needs to do to get Alpine back to where it is. And what can only be described as a good thing is that Colapinto is singing from the same hymn sheet. And sure, Paul Aron has demonstrated a lot of maturity in his duties as the reserve driver, and there have been instances where he has been impressively quick and has shown potential, and he was better in Formula 2, he was in the top 3, which should warrant, in theory, a place within Formula 1. But here comes that word politics again, something that Franco's learnt very quickly and might be Aron's undoing, unfortunately. Because Aron's employment at that team is muddied by Oaks' influence. The high-tech influence is what got Paul into that team in the first place and probably would have been the guarantor for a seat next year behind the scenes. That, though, is gone, and Franco's now having to manage political stormy seas and uncertainties. And whilst I'm quite certain James would be disappointed to see such things and what Colapinto has to do, it's what you gotta do at Alpine just to survive. And realistically, aside from Paul Aron, what other option does Alpine have? Flavio said so himself, at least for the time being. It is down to 2 men, Franco and Paul. Kushmaini, Gabriele Mini, for example, the Alpine Academy representatives within Formula 2, yeah, they are very, very much talented. But given where Alpine is right now, and the people who have left said academy, namely Nicolas Solov and then Victor Martin, it's very much a tell that, really, if you are part of the Alpine Academy, you are really not going to be getting into that team anytime soon. Jack Doohan was the Academy's only hope. And if only Alpine had done their contracts properly, Oscar Piastri would have been the best billboard Alpine Academy could have had. But yeah, Maini and Mini, they do not scream constant race winners by Briatore's own admission, him ranting about Formula 2 drivers, including them, by proxy. And like I touched upon earlier in the video, both Cadillac drivers were entertained around the idea of going to Alpine, but ultimately turning them down, no matter how much money was given to them, or how much authority or influence in comparison to Gasly that they had. And they very much would have been very important pawns within the Alpine game, the chessboard. But Alpine were ultimately snubbed, so they are going to have to rely on their own to try and rebuild, very much like what Williams had to do in 2023. They had no choice but to promote Logan Sargent, a decision which I think was 1 year too early if they were going to make it at all. But they had to make do what they had at the time. Same applies to Alpine. And they've got Franco in the car at the moment, so they've just got to make do. And then Paul Aron is right there to pick up the pieces if Colapinto cannot adapt to the new regulations. As far as I'm concerned, he's close enough to Gasly to justify the patience, and why I really rate him. He can handle Briatore's fire without burning up, and the commercial support means Alpine has every reason to give him a real shot. If he can bag that first point before the season's over, it will feel to him and the team like multiple points. And a point I wish to make to you is to go and watch this video over here, which I know you will like. I'll go and see you over there. I'm just going to go and change my top.